out fucking birch veneer
What did you
and
say?
oils.
But what did you say just trips you out always?
It trips me out how many we don't see each other that often, and it trips me out how many
Bring the mic closer
random
to.
things end up becoming things we've focused on, like Spartan trailers is how it. Is this thing on?
Yeah. Can you hear yourself?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Would you rather not? You don't have to wear the
Maybe
headphones.
a bit less. Yeah.
I can also.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just tell you then if you are.
Okay.
I like the. I think when you hear yourself, you talk quieter and you.
Okay.
But you do that anyway. It just
can
makes
try
it
it.
makes it a little bit more. Oh wait, this is really.
This is very romantic, sharing a cable.
Well, I mean, I haven't figured out.
It's like,
the
you
best
know, when
solution yet.
you're both listening on the same headphones, you're both listening to a
Yeah,
song.
it's not quite that.
With flirting.
Yeah, so we do have very parallel existences and parallel loves. We've had parallel loves of many things, including people. And but I don't know, should we talk about how we met, or should we talk about, I want to go back farther. I like doing these podcasts because it's a kind of excuse to like ask more intimate and detailed questions that I might otherwise, even though we've known each other for years. Like, I don't know much about like your childhood, how you got into music. So I'd love to just hear about your background a little bit, if you would. Ooh. If you would be willing to go there. Like, how does a Freeland end up from England to here?
It's a long story.
Yeah.
I feel like I've just been watching your films, so I kind of actually do know quite a lot about your backstory.
They're very exhibitionistic.
Yeah.
Sometimes, my films.
Well, yeah, the family tree thing. I started life in Hertfordshire, just north of London. Fairly norm-core upbringing. To a lovely family. Lucky. They were still together till my dad died like 3 years ago.
Wow.
I have a great brother.
Older or younger?
Younger, 3 years younger than me.
Uh-huh.
He's really into gardens. I'm a nature boy.
Yeah, we were just talking to an old friend of mine, new friend of yours, and she was just like, nature doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
She's like, after 2 minutes, I'm like, this is nice, but what's next? Oh. You can't relate to that at all.
I just can't.
I should say for our audience, who may or may not know your brilliant music, the way I know Adam is by being both desert dwellers, and you live so much more remotely than I do. And people in Italy, where I'm, grew up, think I'm crazy for being out here, but I can drive 10 minutes and be at a grocery store or restaurant. And even it's 2 miles up a dirt road, but to see Adam, you have to go like, how many miles? 20 miles on a dirt road?
It feels like 20. It's exactly 5 miles.
But 5 miles from already going way the fuck up there. And I mean, I've never seen a place like this. It's literally, you can see for hundreds of miles in every direction without seeing one man-made thing.
It is amazing. Every day I can't quite believe it's real. It's persistently real. Most things in life sort of normalize.
That's what I found when I moved here. I was worried about two things: feeling bored and feeling isolated. And I've literally never. I don't really know boredom generally, because I think life is too interesting to be bored. But I've never been bored for even 5 minutes here. And just watching the light change, it sounds ridiculous, but it's always enthralling. And I think that people who live in the city don't realize how compelling just being surrounded by nature can be.
It's everything.
Did you grow up in nature?
No, but we went we're going to go deep desert for sure. We kind of didn't have a huge amount of money, so we sort of go on camping holidays. Uh-huh. It's kind of what you do in England. You go on like camping holidays into like a miserable, damp place and hope that you don't get flooded or something. But it was great, and we'd go camping in France as well. And then like these mass campsites where there was like thousands of other people with kids everywhere. I mean, that was the point. But now that's my idea of a total nightmare. But I love sleeping under canvas. And all those years on tour, I just always wished that I didn't want to stay in some fancy hotel. I just wanted to stay under canvas. Now glamping's happened, and it's kind of like you could actually make that happen.
But so what is it about nature? I mean, why do you think it's so, you're so drawn to it? Does it have to do with memories of this childhood, or is there something more deep?
No. I mean, I don't really understand this question, because it's everything, a relationship with nature, to me, right? And obviously, we're just talking with your friend. I mean, like, being in amongst a place where there isn't a huge amount of humans, and it's a lot of natural beauty, for me, it's like well, I should backtrack. It goes back to John Perry Barlow, who's in your film.
Yeah, who's another person and thing we have in common.
I spent this New Year's Eve with him at my house and his daughter Amelia in...
John Perry Barlow was a dear friend of both of ours, who was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead and brilliant thinker and writer and founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And anyway, we could go on and on talking about him, but
probably the most inspiring person I've actually been friends with.
Really?
You know, good friends with. I mean, Barlow had a lot of good friends. But I think a very influential figure. And for me, and anyway, I spent this New Year's Eve with him and Amelia, and the next morning I wrote a list of like, okay, I was super inspired. I was like, I'm going to write a list of like life goals, and I'm going to write a list of my peak moments so far. And I'd sort of merged those lists, but every single peak moment I could think of was when I was in nature on my own or with like one other person. So I was like, well, why aren't I just living in, why am I doing nature so infrequently? And then the other things were like, I always wanted to build a house, and I wanted to use my hands more, and I wanted to shoot arrows. And the list was like, buy land, build house, take up archery. And 12 weeks later, I'm shooting arrows in some boulders up in the desert.
But it's so ironic. I want to question this whole idea of nature a little bit, because I do think human beings are part of the natural environment, and what we do is natural, including make cities and group together. But it is ironic to hear you dedicated your life to making electronic music and, you know, DJing in front of crowds. It seems like there's a schism there in your desires.
I think not at all. It's the balance.
Yeah,
it's the flip of of the pendulum. I spent my whole career around a lot of people, and I realized I love nature, and now I'm deep in nature. I did it. I actually did the dream. Like, why wait till I'm old before I do it? I'm just gonna do it. I've lost my train of thought because I took that thing.
Do you want to say what it is you took?
I just realized I'm really stoned. Damn it.
No, it's a good thing. I always find I don't like weed. It's like the only drug that disagrees with me. But there have been a few times when I used to be able to get stoned, and really, I think it's good for a meandering thing like a podcast, because we don't want to be too linear or rigid in our conversation. Yeah. And anytime you lose the train of thought, I'll pick it up and bring it somewhere else. Yeah. So you have nothing to worry about.
I've got in my fridge. I'm just going to the airport now, and I was like, oh, it would be nice just. I'll have a couple of CBD thing, but I guess next to it is this other one that's like the full party mode THC.
Did you take it by accident?
I think I must have taken the wrong one.
Oh,
I wasn't planning on being stoned.
I love it. I love it.
Anyway.
I feel like it'll open up different portals. I mean, in honor of our friend Barlow, who was a huge advocate of mind-altering substances. I think there is something psychedelic about being in nature, in the sense that I think Terence McKenna talked about psychedelics being boundary dissolving. And I think that, cities are very boundary defined. When you have people close together, you need to put a lot of walls up, right? And you need to not only literal walls, but also probably between humans, there have to be, my last podcast guest, Samir, he talked about he became homeless for a month in New York after graduating from law school. And he said that his first time begging for money when he was hungry, after 2 days he hadn't eaten, the way New Yorkers had learned to just ignore you. He said it was so shocking to ask somebody and just have them not even see you. And he said he figured out he had to go to Penn Station, where people were coming from out of town, where they weren't so inured to suffering of other human beings that they would just completely ignore it. And we said, you have to, in order to live in New York, you can't, if you had a normal level of empathy, you would just become a puddle probably, right? You have to become hardened. And I think that, out here, the walls are down, right? You literally have no walls in your house. You're living in a tent with some trailers.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you have to create some distance from other people. You do like solitude more than I do.
I do, and I worry that I like it more and more. I'm becoming kind of an antisociable person. But I'm happier.
Yeah. Do you think human beings were meant to be more separate?
I mean, what is it? The Dunbar number? We lived up to 140 humans, and then we fractured. That's how they think communities sort of worked. We beyond 140 people, the tribes would fraction, and then they'd go off, and then once they form 140 people, So we're not hardwired to have 6,000 social media friends and all the friends we don't really have our biology hasn't quite caught up with us. It wasn't very long ago that we were living in below the Dunbar number, and now we're and I don't know if we have our ability to. I certainly don't. I find it very hard to hold that. I feel like I'm a bad friend a lot of the time, because the friendships I cherish, I just don't have enough time. And then there's everything else. But that's a trip I've got over. I've got over that trip, but that's where I was in terms of taking on more humans. But it might be a balance from. I think we talked about this. I would call myself an introvert in that I recharge from being alone or with one person, and then I really need it. I mean, but I love people, and I'm not some hermit. Well, I might become one, but I love being around people. Do you know what I mean? And then sharing that juice. But then to charge up my battery again, I have to be alone, in nature, preferably alone. Whereas I think you're an extrovert. I think you charge up around people, and then you can go away and be alone, knowing you've got that nourishment of friendship around you. That would be my guess.
Yeah, and I also I think it requires a lot of confidence to be alone, and I'm learning that. I do think I seek validation from people sometimes, and I don't know. I mean, when I first moved up here, one of my closest friends came to visit me, and I was so proud of the place. And I think we both scored incredible spots that are basically irreplaceable. And I was so proud to show my friend this place, and he looked really concerned. And I was like, "What's wrong? You don't like it?" And he's like, "I just can't imagine you alone up here up this dirt road." He was really worried about me.
My mum's still there.
She's worried about you.
Yeah.
But then I found myself, I never was alone. And then my neighbor said, when I want to be alone, I go to Los Angeles. So there's this paradox of, and then when people come to visit me, they usually stay for a couple of days. So there's a real connection. When I was in LA and I'd invite people over to stay, they'd come for half an hour. And already at the beginning of the interaction, you're already kind of in the back of your mind thinking about what's going to happen next. And just like Diana was saying earlier, she's like, I'm even nature, I'm like, what's next? And I'm like, that's a product of being in a city. We're like trained like ant dogs to like think about what's next. And I think this kind of open-ended like attitude towards time is a very different posture. And I do think you're right that there's like for hundreds of thousands of years as modern humans with these same brains, we were living in small packs, wandering around nature, doing nothing a lot of the time, or nothing, you know, by today's standards.
How are you supposed to keep up? Like, our biology isn't there. No wonder mental illness is rife. I mean, it's just terminal everywhere. Like, we're not wired for this.
But so I do want to go back to your background. How did you get into, because as someone who's attracted to nature in this way, I would think if you love music, you would like pick up a quote unquote more natural instrument, whether it's a drum or even a wooden, you know, a guitar or something that's been around for thousands of years or, you know, many centuries. How did you get into making electronic music? What was your attraction? There is something, I think of electronic music as being very primal in a way, as being this very, like, the beat is more tribal almost and insistent. But I'm just curious, how did you get into that?
I think I was like an electronics geek.
Really?
As a kid, yeah, I was really into physics.
Uh-huh.
It was like the only thing I was good at school was physics. And I wasn't even great at that, but I just was into like making radios and soldering circuits.
Uh-huh.
And then I got into like remote control cars, and I used to build RC cars, and then I got into hi-fi. That was the next lead. And then I wanted hi-fi so bad, I got like a paper round when I was like 13, and I just went out in a miserable English morning to make £7.50 a week to buy like separates, and like I wanted these like Wharfdale speakers and this like Kenwood CD player. I was the first kid I knew to have a CD player, and I just started buying hi-fi, and I just started listening, and I didn't.
What kind of music were you listening to? What do you remember your first CD?
My first CD, I think, was Dire Straits' "Money for Nothing." No, what was that album called? The one, yeah, that one. But.
And you were what, like 12, 13?
I don't remember. Not good with time. Something like that. But anyway, I was just a hi-fi geek. So I got into sound, really. And so I think, obviously I didn't realize any of this then, but now, having made a career in sound, if you met me when you were 17, when I was 17, I don't think you would have thought it very likely I went into the world I went into.
Into the music world, or into the desert world?
Yeah, that's a
which would have been more predictable at that time.
Yeah. Maybe not, but anyway.
No, I'm asking, if I met you at 17, which would have seemed more likely, that you become an electronic musician and DJ, or that you would become a desert hermit?
Probably the former. The former. Yeah. And then I just listened to, I was into sound, and then I got into, when I was at uni, got into clubbing. And we'd go out every night, and I just became obsessed. This is like London in the early 90s in London, and
where were you at uni?
South Bank, like just south of Elephant Castle area.
And what were you studying?
Design. It was a pretty like average course at an average place, because it's the one place that would actually have me, I think. But I wanted. Were
you a rebellious kid? Had you been a good student?
No, I was like not very academic.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually came out of school sort of thinking I was pretty not very bright. But I look back and think, I just probably wasn't inspired very well.
Yeah.
But anyway, DJ culture in London, club culture in London in the early 90s was just an unbelievable period of time looking back. And
Tell me about it.
Well, it was just there. We were living in central London, and we'd just walk every night we just went to all the clubs. We were, that's what I was doing. And my roommate had turntables, and I just got completely into. He was like playing drum and bass at the time. Was called Jungle, and I just got super into playing around with his turntables. And then I was going to these clubs, and I was like buying vinyl, and I was doing mixtapes, and I was giving to him. I was going to a lot of these clubs that were great, but the actual DJs weren't that good. I was like, I can do better. And I'd give him the tapes, like, Adam, we'd love to book you, but you're not going to sell tickets. I'm like, I'll sell. If you book me, I'll fill this club. And I did eventually. This was after years of going clubbing, but eventually I got to the point where I was like, I'm gonna fucking do this. And,
Do you think there's something like primordial about dancing in a club and taking, I guess it was probably a lot of ecstasy at the time. And I mean, I'm just wondering if there's this, I'm trying to draw a parallel between your draw to nature and your draw to this experience of being in a club. I think there is one. Am I wrong?
I think both of these things are true. I mean, in that, I think my nature really is a reaction to spending all those years in the nightclubs. I mean, I think, but
no, but you as a reaction, as an opposition. But do you think that there's a parallel in the sense of like the way like in the early, tribal humans would probably gather around a fire and beat on drums and dance?
Yes,
like
absolutely, it's utterly primal, and the tempo is utterly primal. I mean, the dance music sort of has hit in somewhere between like 120, 130 beats per minute. It's like that's how our heart rate's going. So that's, it's just biological. It's house music isn't going anywhere. You know what I mean? That tempo, repetitive beats, we tapped into something much deeper and tribal and shamanic, and we maybe took us a couple of decades to figure out what we'd done. I don't know. Maybe it took me.
No, for sure. I mean, I think there's like Dulcinea meditates, and she says and she loves hardcore techno, and she says like that techno is much more meditative than any other type of music, and it's just like it seems counterintuitive to people who think of electronic music as being out of touch with basic humanity. I think there's a cliche by an older generation that might think of electronic music as being less deep or less or artificial in some way, right? I mean, in the early days it was considered cheating to make music on a synthesizer even.
Yeah,
right.
It still is. I mean, when people ask me what I do, I don't really say I'm a musician, because I'm not. I don't really play any instruments, but the computer is my instrument. I play that. I can make anything that's in my head pretty much in that computer. But if you say to someone, I play the computer, they're like, ah. You know what I mean? Like, they get out of here. You're not real.
That's what it was like. Have you seen the Live in Pompeii Pink Floyd movie?
Yes.
And they spend half the time trying to justify the fact in the interview parts. They're always trying to justify the fact that they use these synthesizers and that it's actually making music. And now it sounds really weird, because now we do accept that people make music using, in fact, people use vintage synthesizers and make this kind of like vintage music using analog synths. And now the same sort of like vilification that was going on with synthesizers happens by some people about the computer. But I actually just met someone the other day who I was like, what do you play? And he says, I play the computer. And he said it proudly. And I thought, that's cool. Like, shouldn't apologize for that. Like, it's difficult.
It just depends which generation you're talking to.
Right.
But yeah, you've got some good synthesizers here.
Yeah.
For a piano guy.
Well, I'm not a piano guy. I'm a guitar guy originally. I played, flamenco guitar for 20 years.
I'm just fucking with you.
But yeah. But I'm a collector, and I got into just these beautiful instruments. I find just as much beauty in this Moog than I do in that handmade flamenco guitar. It's just a different era.
It is,
right? Or the piano. I heard an interview with Brian Eno, and he was like, the piano is one of the most complex pieces of technology that we know still now as humans. And for sure, there was some harpsichord player who was saying the piano is cheating. There's thousands of moving parts in there that are really complex to understand.
It's like the book to storytelling, right? I mean, in that when books came along, it was the same thing.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, you know what? I think we're about to see a really interesting time of new instruments.
Tell me.
Obviously all the software ones, and there's really cool indie companies making really small, very toy-like interfaces, but really good circuitry and fun, creative ways of doing stuff. There's like company called Teenage Engineering that do these like crazy little things. But so there's all these new synths and tiny electronic. They feel like toys, but they're super powerful, and so there's a whole generation of amazing synths that are going to get less and less expensive, and so it's gone democratizing the production process, which basically happened anyway. But then I think all these sort of like sound baths and gong stuff is like everyone's doing it, right? Before it was just the hippies, and now it's the LA folk. Those big city people with their big hats.
Is this chair uncomfortable for you?
No, I'm just high.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure your back isn't hurting. I have to sometimes sit cross-legged because otherwise my back hurts. But so where do you think it's going? Like, where do you have a vision of like instruments that are coming in the next 5-10 years that we should be on the lookout for, or how music's going to change?
Music's going to change. I don't know how, but I think it's a very exciting moment right now, which we can get to because I'm struggling holding my train of thoughts and things. You're going to have to keep me on track.
I'm not going to try and keep you on track.
Oh,
I'm just going to let you.
But I want you to bring back to what I was just about to say because that
go
was
for it.
important.
What
What
it's
was your question?
Let's see. We talked about the primordiality of electronic music.
Oh, new instruments.
And new instruments. Yeah.
So
wait, bring that underneath. There you go.
Our flirting thing isn't going very well.
Well, I thought it was going great.
No,
Fuck.
No, I did. I meant this flirting thing, not our conversation. Yeah, this what I'm building is this studio, which is sort of hanging in a canyon, and I'm interested in wind and how we can sort of turn the wind into sound, and whether I can sort of use.
Well, the wind is sound.
The wind is sound.
Turn it into recorded sound.
Well, harmonically resonating sound.
Ooh. Like
music.
What's the difference between sound and music?
Mathematics.
Like a consistent wave.
Symmetry. It's just the consistent repetition, oscillation.
Oscillations, right?
Yeah.
But you can take sounds and turn them into music.
Absolutely. That's what we do.
That's
what I do. I mean, that's what electronic people do.
Yeah. But so you're mixing like sounds that are generated by the computer or synthesizer and recorded sounds of like wind, for example.
Yes, and anything.
Like what else?
Well, with the Acid first record, we did a lot of just recording the vocals on iPhones and like not doing fancy big studio stuff and just recording like the crickets on your phone. But then, so really bad quality recording done very casually. And then super high production, tight electronic sounds that create this sort of juxtaposition.
If you don't know the Acid, look them up because they're a fantastic band. Go
Thanks.
on. No, really.
Thank you. It's like that sound, but you can, if you don't put that other stuff in there, it feels very cold and urban, and maybe urban's the wrong word, but it's just putting natural sounds into electronic music, even if they're mixed subliminally, like just you don't even hear them, like white noise. There's something absolutely that affects the psyche differently.
Can you talk about how you went from? I do want to go back to new instruments too. If we can want to do that first, but how did you go from? You started booking DJ gigs. Was it as kind of gradual transition from being a DJ to making your own music? Can you just walk someone who doesn't know how that world works through that process of like both practically in your life and career and creatively? How does one go from DJ to musician?
One wants to hear what doesn't exist. So as a DJ, I had this sort of particular sound in my head, whereas I wanted the tempo of house music, but I wanted like the beats of the sort of trip hop thing that was happening at the time, which is sort of an early genre of downbeat electronic music. I'd hope that's not condescending term, but I know this isn't a podcast about genres of music, but mixing that kind of tempo with the beats and then referencing early like hip house records and early rave records, and I wanted to hear this sound that basically had been already, but it with a different twist. And so I was finding like techno records and B-sides, and taking drum and bass records, which, you know, on the vinyl it's 33 or 45, slowing 45s down to 33, and playing things half time. And I wasn't hearing the music I wanted to hear, and so I started going to the studio with producers. But I'd already been successful as a DJ. It was a different time then.
And were you DJing always with vinyl?
Yes, there wasn't an option at that time.
This is when, late 90s?
Early 90s.
Early 90s.
Well, I put out my first album in 96, which was just a compilation called Coastal Breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And that launched me from like having a name around London to like international. That was really the kickoff.
And then would you go and perform this album?
It was just a mix CD. It wasn't, I'd play some tracks from it.
Right.
But at the time, that's what you did as a DJ. You put out a mix CD.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, so that really launched me.
And was that recorded in a studio, or was that recorded like live?
It was recorded in the office of the record label that made the deal, and they had one turntable up here, and they had another one down here because they didn't have the right enough space, and this tiny shitty little mixer, and I did it in one take, and I think back of how crappy those situations was, but it worked out. I'd practiced it, so it worked out. But that was the day.
So you'd had to practice.
There's no editing. There's no editing then.
Wow.
You just do it.
Uh-huh,
right? And I can't believe how janky the setup was that I did it on. It's a joke. But it worked out. Anyway, so at that time, if that was happening, it just kind of went off pretty big time when I was 21, and so I put a record label together and started signing other artists that were making this sound I wanted to hear.
DJs or electronic musicians?
Electronic producers that do DJ. Well, most of them actually didn't, but that's generally how it is. Yeah, producers. And like I worked for a record label called RNS Records, which was this legendary techno record label. Still is. They put the sort of the classics of early techno on RNS Records, and I quit that job because I wanted to do my own record label, and then that's how Marine Parade started.
And did you have like influences like in your teens and early 20s as you were coming up? Like, were there people who like you aspired to be like in terms of producing? And can you talk about who some of your early influences were?
Well, I think it was like Sasha and DJ Harvey, who were two British DJs, were probably my like greatest influences as like to get me into DJing. There's a million, but those two I can pick out. I can really be very specific about why they were. I could, influential.
What was it about them? Can you just say a few words? My first like ecstasy experience was to a Sasha gig, so it's like some kind of bond is going to happen there, right? You know what I mean? You don't have a choice. It's like something happens in your neural circuitry. It's like a chicken seeing its the face of its mother, right? It's just like, okay, got to do this. Yeah. And what was it like playing these big gigs and getting well known in this world? Like, can you describe the lifestyle a bit? Was it a lifestyle you were enjoying? Was it too much excess? Was there a lot of partying from your end, or was it watching a lot of people party and trying to stay,
That one. I was actually never very good at taking drugs. I'm just a total lightweight. Like one of my first ever gigs in London, I was there with my buddy Dimitri, and I thought I'd rock the party, and he's like, at the end of the show, I was like, that was great, huh? He's like, that was not a good gig. And I was like, fuck. And I realized that anyway, I never took ecstasy ever again.
Because you had and you didn't do as good a job as you thought you had.
It's a terrible job.
Really?
Well, I don't know if it's terrible, but I'm better like alcohol. A bit of alcohol works. Yeah. When I'm performing, but I can't really.
Is that unusual?
I don't know. I mean, it's the partying is more about sustaining the lifestyle, right? If you're living if you're living on the road, it's a really tough lifestyle. When do you sleep? You know, when do you sleep? So people get into the stimulants, and then it's just like a cycle of like no sleep, and no sleep, and no sleep.
Yeah.
And I was never very good at not sleeping, so I had no choice but to like not do all that really.
And so you just managed to like sleep when you weren't working.
I still managed to not do a very good job of sleeping, and I think that's eventually why I stopped touring. Sleep.
Yeah.
But I'm still not the best sleeper, but I'm much better now. Anyway, stoned again, lost it.
You want to talk about early influences, or you want to talk about new instruments, or you want to talk about the desert, or do you want to talk about love and polyamory? That's how we met.
You asked the questions.
Well, the way I met Adam, I think we should tell this story. Are you okay with me telling this story?
I'm okay with telling. We should maybe take the names of the culprits out of it.
Yes.
Or maybe I'm out of respect to them. I don't know.
Yeah, you watched my movie. You see, I tend towards openness, not just in my relationships, but in my life as well. But yeah, we don't need to say anyone's names. But I'm just gonna tell the story briefly, and you can interject, because it was funny. Like we've known each other now for years, and we had never actually heard each other tell the story of how each of us encountered the other in this. Like, we have these very parallel lives. We had, like, when I heard about you, you know, we're the same age. We've both like grown up partly in Europe, and ended up in this, what to the rest of the world seems like a pretty bizarre out there place, and to us feels like home. And I think we had the same trailers, the same cars. We both tried to like have old Jaguars going up these dirt roads. I think the same model and year of Jaguar too. This absurd little element of elegance or poshness. I don't know what you'd call it, but it's just a funny anyway. So I'm here, 2 miles up this dirt road, and hosting all sorts of interesting people, meeting more interesting people here than I ever met in LA, because I always have this influx of travelers and seekers, and I always, like, people say, how do you have strangers in your house? Because I would rent trailers. Now I don't anymore, but I had for years I was renting trailers on Airbnb, and people would ask me, how do you have total strangers in your house? And I'm like, they're only strangers for a couple of minutes, and then they're fellow travelers. The type of person who wants to rent a trailer 2 miles up a dirt road is 99% of the time the type of person I want to hang out with. And one such person showed up here, and she was saying, oh my God, I met this guy named Adam. He's amazing. And was just going on and on about your beautiful land and your beautiful face. And anyway, so I kept hearing these stories. And then I, had made this movie, Monogamish. And after 10 years of very, kind of somewhat traditional monogamous marriage, and I met these 2 extraordinary, gorgeous, amazing, fascinating women who I introduced to each other, and they ended up falling in love and with each other and with me for a moment. And then we were all living here for a brief moment, and a friend of mine came to visit, and she said, Tao, I have some bad news for you, because you've peaked and there's no way your life can go anywhere but downhill from here. So I hope that you're okay with that. Anyway, so we end up going, the 3 of us, to Pappy and Harriet's, which is the local legendary kind of bar where great music happens. And I saw Nicholas Jar there and all these other incredible musicians. And I don't remember who we went to see, but
Slow Dive.
And there was this Adam that I kept hearing about. And suddenly the 2 women, like, looked at me and said, Tao, this polyamory thing goes both ways. It's not going to be just you with a bunch of girls.
That was the only time.
Clearly with like eyeing Adam. And then the next day, Adam invited us to his incredible property.
One of them hit me up on Instagram, actually.
Before we even came up there.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I didn't know this detail.
No, that's how the invitation happened.
I didn't realize this.
No,
but that's why they said. That's why they said this goes both ways.
Yeah.
They had a mission. They were on a mission.
No, they were
one of them.
Great.
What's that?
Yeah. No, they're just great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we end up we get an invite. Obviously a little nudged invite, it seems. I'm learning at this moment.
Just fucking with you. Just fucking with you, dude.
Anyway, so we go up and there's this incredible piece of land that really is everything that it had been cracked up to be, because like it's funny because I think of myself as living so remotely and kind of romantically, and it made me feel almost like urban by comparison. Like I have a house with electricity and running water, and this was this really beautifully primitive and elegant like life that you'd created. And I just saw one of their, again, we're not going to say their names, but one of them,
the Spanish one.
Yes. I just suddenly saw in her eyes that a new like horizon had opened up, not just literally in front of her, but I could see this shift happen. And so it was like a kind of a difficult thing to adjust to, but at the same time I needed to kind of practice what I preach, because I just like literally made this film and spent 5 years like studying this idea of like that we shouldn't own each other and that we should allow each other to be free and all of this. But you know, there is a side of this that one becomes a little bit one can become a little possessive here and there. I've tried to resist that, mostly successfully, I think, but it's definitely not without its challenges. And this was one of such challenge, because I was quite, you know, happy with the situation as it wasn't looking for any new changes.
I really felt for you when you told me this story the other week, because I've never heard this. It was so different to my experience. If I'd really known I was just breaking your heart there and then, you know, I would have probably approached it differently. But from my experience, was like, this guy's made a film about polyamory. His girlfriends are hitting me up.
Yep.
They're all coming over. I'm like, it's on.
And it was great.
So it was just like, you know, I thought that's what you were there for. So I'm pretty.
There's nothing to apologize for. Like my dad used to say, "You wanted the bicycle, now pedal." You know. And
who knew we would end up? You know, I ended up with one of them for several years.
Exactly. That's what's so beautiful about this story. I mean, it wasn't just like I think my intuition was right. I don't experience jealousy very often. That's why I think I'm made for this sort of like boundary pushing type of relationship. Like if someone is very jealous by definition, they shouldn't do this. But the couple of times I've been jealous in my life has been with great reason. I was in an open relationship like before I got married, like 25 years ago. And we both were with countless other people, and we would always tell each other about it. It was super fun. And then one time she comes home and she'd just been at a party with this guy and they just kissed and nothing more. And I could just, something was weird. And I got this kind of knot in my stomach and I felt like uncomfortable about it. They're still together 25 years later.
Wow.
And so like, I think there was this moment of like recognizing that that the course had shifted, and like sometimes there's a destiny that takes, there's a Mexican saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So there was this amazing moment. And then basically I think I saw just some sparks happen. And then I realized, okay, now is like where my theory has to be put into practice. And I can either like, you know, call her out on like maybe this wasn't done in the best way, or I could call you out and say like, hey, you know, let's like slow down, or like, this is not what I'm trying to do. But instead, I realized that, I think I realized this often in this way of life, is that you have to choose between your higher self and your most like your more base instinct, which can be a bit, you know, I think responding to jealousy or insecurity, and you're put to this test often. And I decided very consciously, after like walking around in the middle of the night, sleepless and wondering like what was happening, that
Oh man, I'll get the violin. It's good.
Anyway, this is a great story. I wouldn't trade anything that happened for anything. But basically, we tried then for a while to be in a kind of, we said once we went from a triangle to a square. And for a while, everybody was kind of with everybody. And then it was clear that you guys had a not deeper, like I think just a different journey to go on. And I had to kind of just like honor and accept that. And, you know, I think it was exactly how it's supposed to happen, obviously. Like, I think you have to, life is all about like, you know, gently maybe influencing the direction you want it to go in, but also accepting things the way they happen, right? Anyway, that's my story with Adam and how we met.
We're all friends. Good friends.
That's the beauty. That's the beauty of this. Like, I'm still friends with every lover I've been with since I've decided to like be open like this, and because it's less boundary defined. And I find that two people who love the same person, if you take away this element of competition, I've said this many times on this podcast, but like if you take away the element of competition, you find that two people who love the same person have a lot in common. And that's what stayed. And now we're friends. And, you know, and I'm friends with there's actually a concept in polyamory called metamor, which is like your lover's lover is your metamor. And there is a lot of talk about metamors, friendships that are born through this.
I'm so high, I'm shaking.
Really?
I'm interested. Hang on, I'm just checking. Oh shit!
What time is it?
It's 8:06.
And you have to leave what time?
8 o'clock.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my god. Okay, well let this be the first of several conversations. How long have we been talking?
Time flies when you're having fun.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I gotta go right now.
Okay, well listen, this was part 1 with Adam Freeland, and we were going to do.
Next time it won't be high,
or maybe even higher.
Yeah, maybe we should just get different drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, Adam. Actually, you're going to be back next week. Maybe we can just continue the conversation instead of leaving it half. Coitus interruptus.
That would be great.
If not, when you come back from Europe. But listen, if people want to hear your music, what should they look for?
Well, the band's called The Acid. Have an album called Liminal. I would start with that. And then my solo stuff's just Adam Freeland. You can find. I haven't actually put out a huge amount of singles as my name, but DJ mixes.
Okay, well, Adam's flying away.
SoundCloud, stuff like that.
And we'll talk more. Thank you, Adam.
It's good to see you.
You too.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting to be high.
Oh, we only talked for 45 minutes. It wasn't so long.